Marcus Thompson pulled his truck to the shoulder when he saw the police cruiser with its hood up, smoke curling into the cold December air. He told Aaliyah to stay buckled and stepped out into the wind. The officer turned at the sound of his boots on gravel, and when she removed her sunglasses, the world stopped. Rachel Collins, the woman who had walked out of his life 10 years ago without explanation, leaving wounds he thought he had buried. Now she stood in front of him while his 7-year-old daughter sat in the truck behind him, oblivious to the storm that had just begun. The woman standing beside the disabled cruiser looked older than the girl he remembered, her face sharper, her posture rigid in the winter light, but the eyes were the same. Dark brown, guarded, searching his face the way they used to when she was trying to decide whether to tell him the truth or a version of it. Rachel spoke first, her voice steady but low. She said his name like a question, like she wasn't sure he would answer. Marcus nodded once, not trusting himself to say anything yet. Behind him, Aaliyah shifted in her booster seat, humming something off-key. The sound reminded him where he was, what he was doing, and how badly he wanted to get back in the truck and drive away. But he didn't. He walked toward the cruiser, his boots crunching on the gravel shoulder. Rachel stepped back, giving him space to look under the hood. Steam rose from the radiator, and he could see the split hose before she said anything. It was a simple fix, the kind of thing that shouldn't have stranded anyone. But out here on Route 12, help didn't come quickly. She must have known that when she pulled over. Marcus asked if she had called for a tow. Rachel said she had, but it would be at least an hour. She didn't ask him to stay. She didn't ask him anything. She just stood there with her arms crossed, watching him the way someone watches a stranger they're trying to place. It made him angry in a way he hadn't expected. The idea that she could look at him like that after everything. He told her he had a spare hose in the truck. It wasn't true, but he said it anyway, because standing there doing nothing felt worse than lying. Rachel thanked him, her voice flat, professional. She wasn't wearing a wedding ring. He noticed that before he could stop himself, and then hated that he had noticed at all. Aaliyah called out from the truck, asking if they could go home soon. Her voice carried across the cold air, bright and impatient. Rachel turned toward the sound, and something shifted in her expression. Not sadness exactly, something closer to recognition or loss. She asked Marcus if that was his daughter. He said yes and didn't offer anything else. Rachel nodded slowly as if she had expected it, as if the last 10 years had already told her this story. Marcus went back to the truck and lied to Aaliyah about the hose. He told her he needed to make a quick call, that they would be home soon. Aaliyah asked if the police officer was in trouble. Marcus said, "No, just car trouble." Aaliyah said that was okay then because police officers helped people, so it was good that they were helping her back. The logic was simple, the kind only a 7-year-old could manage without bitterness. He stood outside the truck longer than he needed to, pretending to look through the toolbox in the bed. The truth was, he didn't have a spare hose, and even if he did, he wasn't sure he could stand there long enough to install it. His hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from something older, something he thought he had buried under years of routine and discipline. Rachel appeared beside him without warning. She asked if he was all right. Marcus told her he was fine, which was the easiest lie he had told all day. She didn't believe him. He could see it in the way she looked at him, the way her jaw tightened just slightly. She said she was sorry for the inconvenience, that she would wait for the tow truck, that he didn't need to stay. Marcus told her he didn't have the hose. The words came out harder than he meant them to, almost like an accusation. Rachel's expression didn't change. She said that was fine, that she appreciated him stopping anyway. Then she asked if Aaliyah was his only child. The question felt like a test, or maybe a trap. Marcus said, yes, she was. Rachel nodded again, slower this time, and looked back toward the truck where Aaliyah's face was pressed against the window, her dark curls framing her curious eyes, watching them with open curiosity. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of manure and frozen earth from the fields beyond the road. Marcus remembered that smell from every winter of his life. The way it clung to his clothes and his skin, no matter how many times he washed. He had hated it once, back when he thought he might leave Millbrook and follow Rachel to the city. But he had stayed, and the smell had become something else. A reminder that some things didn't change, even when everything else did. Rachel said she had moved back to Millbrook 2 weeks ago. She said it casually, like it didn't matter, like it was just another fact. Marcus felt the words land in his chest, heavy and cold. He asked why. Rachel said she had been reassigned, that the department needed someone with her experience. She didn't say how long she would be staying. Marcus didn't ask. He told her the tow truck would come eventually, that she should stay in the cruiser to keep warm. Rachel thanked him again, and this time there was something else in her voice, something that sounded almost like regret. Marcus didn't want to hear it. He turned back toward his truck, toward Aaliyah, toward the life he had built without Rachel Collins in it. But before he reached the driver's door, the memory hit him, sharp and unbidden, the kind that doesn't ask permission. 12 years ago, the night before Rachel left for college, they had driven out to the lake at the edge of town. It was late August, the air still warm, but carrying the first hint of autumn. They sat on the hood of Marcus's truck, their backs against the windshield, watching the stars come out one by one. Rachel had been quiet all evening, and Marcus thought it was because she was nervous about leaving. He told her it would be fine, that they would make it work. The distance didn't mean anything when two people wanted the same things. Rachel had turned to look at him then, her face serious in the dim light. She said she believed him. She said she would come back every chance she got, that Millbrook was still home, that he was still home. Marcus had kissed her, tasting the cherry chapstick she always wore, feeling the softness of her hair against his hand. She had kissed him back hard and desperate, like she was trying to memorize him. Before they left the lake, Marcus told her he would wait. It didn't matter how long it took. He would be there when she came back. Rachel promised she would come back. She promised a lot of things that night. And Marcus had believed every one of them because he didn't know any better. Marcus blinked, and the memory dissolved. He was standing beside his truck again, his hand on the door handle, his daughter humming behind the glass. Rachel was still by the cruiser, her arms crossed against the cold, watching him with an expression he couldn't read. He climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine without looking back. Aaliyah asked if the police officer was going to be okay. Marcus said yes. Someone was coming to help her. Aaliyah asked if they would see her again. Marcus said he didn't know, which was another lie. Millbrook was small and Rachel was a cop. Of course they would see her again. The question wasn't if, but how many times and how long he could keep pretending it didn't matter. He pulled back onto the road and drove toward the farm, the fields stretching out on either side, bare and brown under the gray sky. Aaliyah chattered about school, about her friend Maya's new puppy, about the art project she wanted to finish before dinner. Marcus listened without hearing, his mind still caught on the image of Rachel standing beside her cruiser, looking at him like she had something to say but didn't know how to start. By the time they reached the farm, the sun was low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the barn and the pasture where the cows stood in their slow, patient clusters. Marcus parked near the house and helped Aaliyah out of the truck. She ran ahead, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, calling for Dorothy, who was probably in the kitchen starting dinner. Marcus stood in the driveway for a moment, breathing in the cold air, trying to clear his head. The farm was the only thing that had ever made sense to him. His grandfather had worked this land before him, had built something from nothing with calloused hands and stubborn faith. The work was hard but predictable, the rhythms of it steady and unbreakable. He had built a life here, a good life, one that didn't require him to think too much about what he had lost or why. But now Rachel was back, and the careful structure he had built felt suddenly fragile, like a house with a cracked foundation. He told himself it didn't matter, that she was just another person in town, that he could ignore her the way he ignored everyone else who tried to get too close. But even as he thought it, he knew it wasn't true. Rachel Collins had never been just another person, and 10 years hadn't changed that. Inside the house, Aaliyah was already telling Dorothy about the police officer with the broken car. Dorothy listened patiently, nodding in all the right places, but her eyes found Marcus's over Aaliyah's head. She didn't ask any questions, but he could see them there, waiting. Dorothy had raised him after his parents died when he was 8, and she knew him better than anyone. She would know something was wrong before he said a word. Marcus hung his coat by the door and went upstairs to change. His room was the same as it had always been, plain and functional, with a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the south pasture. On the dresser sat an old photograph of his parents on their wedding day, his father's wide smile and his mother's gentle eyes looking back at him. He sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Rachel was back. That was the only fact that mattered, and it was the one fact he didn't know what to do with. Downstairs, he could hear Aaliyah laughing. The sound light and easy. She didn't know what Rachel meant, didn't know the history that stretched between them like a scar. To Aaliyah, Rachel was just a police officer who needed help. And maybe that was all she needed to be. Maybe Marcus could keep it that way. Keep the past where it belonged, buried under years of silence and distance. But as he stood and walked back downstairs, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that the careful balance he had maintained for so long was about to tip. Rachel wasn't just passing through. She was staying. And that changed everything. Marcus saw Rachel again. 3 days later at the farmer's market on Saturday morning, he had taken Aaliyah into town to pick up feed and let her choose something from the baked goods table, the way they did every weekend. It was routine, predictable, the kind of morning that required nothing from him except showing up. But when he turned the corner past the vegetable stands, Rachel was there, standing near the honey vendor, holding a small jar up to the light. She saw him at the same moment he saw her. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Aaliyah tugged on his hand, asking if they could get cinnamon rolls, and the moment broke. Rachel set the jar down and walked toward them, her stride steady and deliberate. The way cops walked when they were on duty, even if they weren't wearing the uniform, she was in jeans and a dark jacket. Nothing official, but Marcus could still see the badge clipped to her belt. Rachel said hello to Aaliyah first, crouching down to her level and asking her name. Aaliyah answered without hesitation, the way she did with everyone, open and trusting in a way that sometimes scared Marcus. She told Rachel about the cinnamon rolls and how her dad always let her pick 2 if she promised to share one with Dorothy. Rachel smiled, the kind of smile that looked almost real, and said that sounded like a good deal. Marcus stayed quiet, watching the exchange with something tight in his chest. Rachel stood and looked at him, her expression careful, neutral. She said it was good to see him again. Marcus said nothing. He told Aaliyah they needed to keep moving, that Dorothy was waiting for them at home. Aaliyah waved goodbye to Rachel, who waved back, and then they were walking away, back toward the truck, back toward the safety of distance. But distance didn't last. The following Tuesday, Rachel showed up at the farm. She pulled into the driveway in her cruiser just after noon when Marcus was fixing a section of fence near the barn. He saw the car and felt his stomach drop, the same sinking feeling he had felt on the road 3 days before. He wiped his hands on his jeans and walked toward her, forcing his expression into something flat and unreadable. Rachel stepped out of the cruiser and explained before he could ask. There had been reports of livestock theft in the area, she said. 3 farms in the past 2 weeks, all within a 10-mile radius. The department was doing check-ins, making sure everyone knew to lock their barns and keep an eye out for anything unusual. She said it like it was routine, like she hadn't chosen to come here herself. Marcus listened without interrupting. When she finished, he told her he would keep the barn locked. Rachel nodded and thanked him, but she didn't leave. She looked past him toward the pasture where the cows were clustered near the water trough and said the place looked good, that he had done well with it. Marcus didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Rachel turned back toward her cruiser, but before she opened the door, she asked if he ever thought about leaving. The question caught him off guard. He asked what she meant. Rachel said she meant the farm, Millbrook, all of it, whether he had ever wanted to go somewhere else. Marcus told her no, he hadn't. This was where he belonged. His family had worked this land for 3 generations. It was in his blood. Rachel looked at him for a long moment, and then she said she was glad one of them had figured that out. She got in the cruiser and drove away, leaving Marcus standing in the driveway with a wrench in his hand and no idea what she had really been asking. That night, after Aaliyah was asleep, Dorothy asked him about the visit. She said she had seen the cruiser from the kitchen window and wanted to know if everything was all right. Marcus told her it was just a routine check. Nothing to worry about. Dorothy didn't look convinced. She set a cup of tea in front of him and sat down across the table, her hands folded in front of her. Dorothy said she knew who Rachel was. She had known the moment Aaliyah mentioned the police officer with the broken car. Marcus didn't ask how she knew. Dorothy had lived in Millbrook her entire life, and she remembered everything, especially the things people tried to forget. She said Rachel's return must be hard for him. Marcus said it wasn't, that it didn't matter, that it had been 10 years, and people moved on. Dorothy didn't argue. She just looked at him with the quiet patience she had always had, the kind that made lying impossible. She asked him if he was protecting Aaliyah or protecting himself. Marcus didn't answer. He finished his tea and went upstairs, but the question followed him, settling into the silence of his room like something he couldn't shake. The next time he saw Rachel, Aaliyah was with him. They were at the hardware store picking up supplies for the irrigation system Marcus had been meaning to fix for weeks. Aaliyah was in the paint aisle, fascinated by the color samples when Rachel walked in. She was in uniform this time, her radio clipped to her shoulder, her expression serious until she saw them. Rachel walked over and said hello to Aaliyah, who lit up immediately. She asked Rachel if she had fixed her car, and Rachel said yes, that it was working perfectly now. Aaliyah said that was good because police officers needed cars that worked so they could help people. Rachel agreed, and then she did something Marcus didn't expect. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small plastic badge, the kind they gave to kids at community events. She handed it to Aaliyah and told her it was an honorary deputy badge, just for her. Aaliyah's face went bright with excitement, her brown eyes wide with wonder. She thanked Rachel 3 times in a row, holding the badge like it was made of gold. Marcus watched the exchange and felt something crack open inside him, something he had been holding shut for a long time. Rachel glanced at him just for a second, and he saw the question there, the same one she had asked at the farm. But this time, he didn't look away. On the drive home, Aaliyah asked why Marcus didn't like Officer Rachel. The question came out of nowhere, casual and direct. The way kids asked things they didn't know were dangerous. Marcus asked what made her think that. Aaliyah said it was the way he looked at her, like he was angry but trying not to be. Marcus told her he wasn't angry, that he just didn't know Rachel very well. Aaliyah said that was okay because Rachel seemed nice, and maybe they could get to know her better. Marcus didn't answer. He kept his eyes on the road and tried to ignore the weight of the plastic badge sitting on the seat between them, a small thing that felt like a threat. 2 weeks passed, and Rachel became part of the landscape. She was at the diner when Marcus stopped for coffee. She was driving past the farm when he was out in the fields. She was everywhere, and Marcus couldn't tell if it was coincidence or something else. He started avoiding town when he could, taking the long way home, skipping the farmer's market. But it didn't matter. Millbrook was too small, and Rachel was too present. Then one evening, just after dark, Marcus was out behind the barn, replacing a section of fence that had rotted through. The work was slow, frustrating, the kind of thing that required patience he didn't have. He was halfway through when he saw headlights sweep across the field, slow and deliberate. A cruiser pulled up near the barn and Rachel stepped out, her flashlight in hand. She called out to him, asking if everything was all right. Marcus told her it was, that he was just fixing the fence. Rachel walked closer, her boots crunching on the frozen ground. She said she had seen the light and wanted to make sure it wasn't anything suspicious given the thefts. Marcus said he appreciated the concern, but he was fine. Rachel nodded, but she didn't leave. She stood there, her flashlight aimed at the ground, and the silence stretched between them like a physical thing. Then Rachel spoke, her voice quieter than before. She said she owed him an explanation. Marcus told her she didn't owe him anything. Rachel said that wasn't true, that she had left without saying why, and that had been wrong. Marcus felt the anger rise in his chest, sharp and sudden. He told her it had been 10 years, that whatever she had to say didn't matter anymore. Rachel looked at him, her face pale in the dim light. She said it mattered to her. Then she said something that made Marcus's hand stop moving. She said she had been pregnant when she left. The words hung in the air, cold and impossible. Marcus stared at her, trying to make sense of what she had just said. Rachel kept talking, her voice steady but strained. She said she had found out a week after he proposed over the phone that she had been terrified, that she didn't know what to do. And then, before she could tell him, she had lost the baby. Marcus felt the ground shift beneath him. He asked why she hadn't told him. Rachel said she didn't know how, that she had been 21 and scared and convinced she wasn't ready to be anyone's wife or mother. She said losing the baby had felt like proof that she wasn't meant for that life, that she would only fail him if she stayed. So she had left instead, and she had spent the last 10 years trying to forgive herself for it. Marcus didn't know what to say. The anger was still there, but now it was mixed with something else, something that felt like grief. He told her she should have trusted him, that he would have been there, that she didn't have to carry it alone. Rachel said she knew that now, but back then all she could see was how young and unprepared she was. She said leaving him was the worst thing she had ever done, and she wasn't asking for forgiveness. She just wanted him to know the truth. Marcus turned away from her, his hands gripping the fence post so hard his knuckles went white. He didn't want to hear this, didn't want to feel the weight of it pressing down on him. He told her she should go. Rachel didn't argue. She said she was sorry. And then she walked back to the cruiser and drove away, leaving Marcus alone in the dark with a truth he didn't know how to carry. 9. And 2 years ago, Marcus had driven 3 hours to the city to meet Rachel at a coffee shop near her campus. He had called her the week before and asked her to marry him. The words clumsy and rushed because he didn't know how else to say them. Rachel had said yes, her voice breaking over the phone, and Marcus had felt like the luckiest person alive. He had taken his grandmother's ring from the drawer where he kept it and driven to the city with it in his pocket, imagining the moment he would slide it onto her finger. But when he walked into the coffee shop, Rachel was already sitting at a table near the window, her face pale and distant. Marcus sat down across from her and pulled out the ring. But before he could say anything, Rachel stopped him. She said she couldn't do it, that she had made a mistake, that she wasn't ready. Marcus asked what had changed. What had? Rachel didn't answer. She just shook her head, her eyes red but dry, and pushed the ring back across the table. Marcus sat there for a long time after she left, staring at the ring, trying to understand what had just happened. The barista had to ask him to leave when they closed. And even then, he sat in his truck in the parking lot until midnight, hoping Rachel would come back and tell him it was a mistake. But she didn't. And Marcus drove home alone, the ring still in his pocket, the weight of it heavier than it had ever been. The memory faded, and Marcus was back behind the barn, the fence half repaired, the night colder than it had been before. He looked down at his hands and realized they were shaking. He tried to steady them, but the shaking wouldn't stop. He thought about the baby Rachel had lost, the one he had never known about, and felt something break inside him that he didn't know how to fix. 3 days later, Marcus heard from someone at the feed store that Rachel had been offered a promotion. She would be moving to a lieutenant position in the city, they said, probably within the month. Marcus felt the news like a punch to the chest. He didn't know why it surprised him. Of course, she would leave again. That was what Rachel did. She built things and then walked away from them. And Marcus had been a fool to think this time would be any different. He went home and threw himself into the work, fixing things that didn't need fixing, staying out in the fields until it was too dark to see. Dorothy watched him from the kitchen window, but didn't say anything. Aaliyah asked if he was mad, and he told her no. He was just busy. But the truth was he was preparing himself for the same loss all over again. And this time he told himself it wouldn't hurt as much, because he already knew how it ended. Marcus spent the next week avoiding anything that might bring him into contact with Rachel. He sent Dorothy into town for groceries. He skipped the farmer's market. He stayed on the farm from sunrise to well past dark, working until his body ached and his mind went quiet. Aaliyah asked why they weren't going anywhere, and he told her it was a busy time, that the farm needed him. She accepted it without argument, the way she always did. But Dorothy watched him with the same quiet concern she had shown for weeks. On Thursday evening, Marcus was in the barn checking the feed inventory when he heard a car pull into the driveway. He looked through the open door and saw the cruiser, its engine idling, headlights cutting through the dusk. He stayed where he was, hoping Rachel would assume no one was home and leave, but the engine cut off and a door opened and closed. Footsteps crossed the gravel, slow and deliberate. Rachel called his name from outside the barn. Marcus didn't answer right away. He set down the clipboard he had been holding and walked to the doorway, keeping his expression blank. Rachel stood a few feet away, still in uniform, her hands at her sides. She looked tired, the kind of tired that came from more than just a long shift. She said she needed to talk to him. Marcus told her there was nothing left to say. Rachel said that wasn't true, that there was something he needed to know before he heard it from someone else. Marcus felt his chest tighten. He asked what she meant. Rachel said she had been offered the promotion, the one everyone in town was already talking about. She said it would mean moving back to the city, taking a position as lieutenant, the kind of opportunity most people spent years waiting for. Marcus nodded slowly, his jaw tight. He told her congratulations and meant it to sound final, dismissive. But Rachel didn't leave. She said she had turned it down. The words took a moment to register. Marcus asked why. Rachel said because she wasn't running anymore, that she had spent 10 years trying to outrun the person she used to be, and it hadn't worked. She said Millbrook was where she needed to be, not because of him, but because it was the only place she had ever felt like herself, even when she was too scared to admit it. Marcus didn't know how to respond. He told her she was making a mistake, that she had worked too hard to throw it away for a town that had nothing to offer her. Rachel said that wasn't for him to decide. She said she wasn't asking for his permission or his approval. She was telling him because he deserved to know, and because she owed him honesty, even if it came too late. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something he hadn't expected. She wasn't the girl who had left him 10 years ago, terrified and uncertain. She was someone else now, someone who had made her choice and was willing to live with it. He wanted to be angry, wanted to tell her she was being reckless, but the anger wouldn't come. All he felt was exhaustion, the kind that came from holding on to something too long. Rachel said she would stay out of his way, that he didn't have to worry about running into her every time he went into town. She said she understood if he didn't want anything to do with her, that she wouldn't blame him. Then she turned and walked back toward the cruiser, her shoulders straight, her stride steady. Marcus watched her go, and for the first time in weeks, he felt something shift inside him, something that felt almost like relief. That night, Dorothy asked him what Rachel had wanted. Marcus told her the truth, that Rachel was staying in Millbrook, that she had turned down the promotion. Dorothy nodded unsurprised and asked what he was going to do about it. Marcus said there was nothing to do, that Rachel's decision didn't change anything. Dorothy looked at him with the same expression she had worn when he was 8 years old and trying to convince her he didn't need help with his homework. She asked him if he was still protecting Aaliyah or if he was just protecting himself. Marcus didn't answer. Dorothy set a hand on his shoulder and told him that fear was a poor reason to turn away from something real. She said he had been a good father, a good man, but that Aaliyah needed more than just safety. She needed to see him take a risk, to show her that love was worth the possibility of pain. Marcus said he didn't know if he could do that. Dorothy said she thought he could, but he had to decide for himself. She reminded him of what his mother used to say, that the bravest thing a man could do was open his heart twice after it had been broken once. Marcus went upstairs and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Dorothy's words circling in his mind. He thought about Aaliyah, about the way she looked at Rachel with open curiosity and trust. He thought about the plastic badge she still carried in her backpack, the one Rachel had given her at the hardware store. He thought about the life he had built, careful and controlled, and realized it had never been about protecting Aaliyah. It had always been about protecting himself from the one thing he couldn't control: loss. 2 days later, on Saturday morning, Marcus was fixing the fence along the north pasture when he saw Rachel's cruiser coming up the long driveway. He straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans, and watched as she parked near the house. She got out and walked toward him, not in uniform this time, just jeans and a jacket, her hands in her pockets. She stopped a few feet away and said she was sorry for showing up unannounced. Marcus told her it was fine. Rachel said she'd been thinking about what she wanted to say, that she had practiced it a dozen times, but now that she was standing here, none of it felt right. Marcus waited. Rachel took a breath and said she wasn't asking him to forgive her, that she didn't expect him to trust her, but she wanted him to know that she wasn't leaving. Not this time. Not for a promotion, not for anything. She said she had made a choice 10 years ago out of fear, and it had been the wrong choice. She said she couldn't undo it, couldn't go back and be the person he needed her to be, but she could be someone different now, someone who stayed, who showed up, who didn't run when things got hard. She said if he didn't want that, she would understand. But she wasn't going to disappear just because it was easier. Marcus looked at her, and for the first time since she had come back, he let himself see the truth. She wasn't asking for a second chance. She was offering one. Not to him, but to both of them. A chance to build something that didn't rely on the past, that didn't carry the weight of what had been lost. He thought about what Dorothy had said, about taking a risk, about showing Aaliyah that love was worth it. Marcus asked Rachel if she wanted coffee. The words came out simple, almost casual, but they felt heavier than anything he had said in years. Rachel looked at him, surprise flickering across her face, and then she nodded. She said, "Yes, she would like that." Marcus gestured toward the house, and they walked together across the yard. The silence between them no longer sharp, but something softer, something that felt like the beginning of understanding. Inside, Dorothy was at the kitchen table with Aaliyah, helping her with a coloring book. Aaliyah looked up when they walked in and smiled at Rachel, holding up the picture she had been working on. Rachel crouched down to look at it, complimenting the color Aaliyah had chosen, and Aaliyah beamed. Dorothy met Marcus's eyes over their heads, her expression warm and knowing, and Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. He made coffee, the simple act grounding him, giving him something to do with his hands. Rachel sat at the table with Aaliyah and Dorothy, answering Aaliyah's questions about police work, about the cruiser, about whether she had ever arrested a bad guy. She answered patiently, kindly, and Marcus realized this was what he had been afraid of. Not that Rachel would leave again, but that she would stay, and he would have to decide whether he was brave enough to let her. When the coffee was ready, Marcus set a cup in front of Rachel and sat down across from her. Aaliyah asked if Rachel could come back and visit again, and Rachel said she would like that, if it was okay with Marcus. Aaliyah looked at her father, her eyes wide and hopeful. Marcus said it was okay. Aaliyah grinned and went back to her coloring. Satisfied, Dorothy stood and said she needed to check on something in the barn, taking Aaliyah with her despite Aaliyah's protests. The door closed behind them, and Marcus and Rachel were alone. Rachel wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, her gaze steady. She said she didn't expect this to be easy, that she knew it would take time. Marcus said he knew that too. Rachel asked if he thought it was worth trying. Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked out the window at the fields, at the barn, at the life he had built from the ruins of what he thought he had lost. He said he didn't know, but he was willing to find out. Rachel nodded, and something in her expression softened. Something that looked almost like hope. They sat there in the quiet kitchen drinking coffee, not saying much, but it was enough. It was a start. 3 months later, the farm looked the same as it always had, but the rhythm of it had changed. Rachel came by on her days off, helping with small repairs, sitting with Aaliyah while Marcus worked, becoming part of the landscape in a way that felt gradual and real. She didn't push, didn't ask for more than Marcus was ready to give, and slowly the walls he had built began to come down. Aaliyah adored her, and Dorothy approved in her quiet, knowing way. Marcus found himself looking forward to the sound of Rachel's car in the driveway, to the easy conversation over coffee, to the moments when their hands would brush, and neither of them would pull away. It wasn't perfect. There were still days when the past felt too heavy, when Marcus wondered if he was making a mistake. But there were more days when it felt right, when he looked at Rachel and saw not the girl who had left him, but the woman who had chosen to stay. One evening, after Aaliyah had gone to bed, Marcus and Rachel sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the fields. The golden light caught the deep brown of Marcus's skin as he leaned back in his chair, more relaxed than he had been in years. Rachel said she was glad she had come back. Marcus said he was too, and realized he meant it. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he let her, the weight of it familiar and grounding. He thought about love, about the way it required risk, required trust, required the willingness to be hurt again. And he thought maybe that was the point, not to avoid the pain, but to choose the possibility of something real, even knowing it might not last. Marcus looked out at the fields, at the life he had built, and knew it was no longer just his. It was theirs, fragile and uncertain, but growing stronger every day. And that, he thought, was enough.